And just a quick correction, why weakness isn't a cause of low back pain. It's a symptom. And it's the same as tightness at of those muscles as well. Now, it comes down to two parts to the muscle. So we have the muscle structure. So we have the muscle itself. We then have bundles that make up the muscle called fasciculi. And then we have muscle fibers that make up the fasciculi. And then we have the muscle cell, so the contractile portion, the sarcomere, which make up the muscle fiber. So we have the smallest part, which is the sarcomere, which is made up of the actin and myosin, which is the contractile proteins. They are laid back to back, and we get a muscle fiber. We get a bundle of muscle fibers called a fasciculi, and then we get a bundle of fasciculi, and we call that the entire muscle. At each level, there are also like a fascial wrapping of it, like cling film. So around the entire muscle, you get the epimysium. Around the fasciculi, you get the perimysium, and then you have the endomysium. So there's your that's essentially the structure of your muscle. What you then have is the nerve that comes in and innervates that muscle and activates it, as an example. But one nerve doesn't activate the whole muscle. There are lots of nerves coming in, activating a selection of muscle fibers. And this is where we need to start understanding, because as I've mentioned, around the muscle fiber, which is a very small part of the muscle, if you can imagine a spring and it's coiled like that, that wraps around the muscle fiber. And what that's doing, like a spring, when you pull it apart, you pull the coil apart and you get the gaps. And then when you let it go, it goes back and there's no gaps. So you have this thing in your muscle called a muscle spindle. And it's detecting length change. So as your muscle gets longer, it detects that. As your muscle gets shorter, it detects that. So with regards to muscle tightness, a reason a muscle becomes chronically tight is because of the neuromuscular system. It's your brain telling your muscle, don't go any further because there's a problem. So what happens is when you stretch a muscle, your brain kicks in and says, no more. And it holds it in that place. So that's one component. The second component is what's called a Golgi tendon organ. Now, the Golgi tendon organ sits in the tendon of the muscle. And this is kind of the second part of what a muscle does. So you've got the muscle spindle that detects changes in length. The Golgi tendon organ detects changes in force. And what that means is just like a fuse box. So imagine what a fuse box does for an appliance or for the house. If there's too much electricity going in, it just cuts it out and shuts it down. So certainly in rehab, a lot of muscle weakness is your Golgi tendon organ shutting the muscle down. So you can do as much strengthening as you like, you won't get full strength gains. You have to override the neuromuscular system. So the reason muscle weakness is a symptom of low back pain is because your brain has perceived a problem, which could be the instability in two vertebrae because there's laxity in a disc. So your brain knows that's there. And what your brain is doing is saying, I don't want any more force going through this part of my body because it may cause more problems further down the line. So what it does is it creates a degree of tension to hold it in place. And then if you try to create more tension, i.e. more strength in the area, it just shuts it down. Now, you can add strength to that. The muscles around it will become stronger if you keep strengthening it. But what you've got is that shaky foundation or weak foundation underneath it. What's more advantageous is to start thinking about the proper solution, which is number one, essentially it's learning to override the neuromuscular system, essentially. Because if you can do that, you can override the Golgi tendon organ and the muscle spindle. So tight muscles, in some respects, are dictated by the muscle spindle not being allowed to be stretched any further because the brain's saying no further. But also the Golgi tendon organ is doing the same for strength. So tightness and weakness are both symptoms of a problem in an area. So again, you can stretch and you can strengthen as much as you like. But if you don't address the actual problem, which is what we talked about in part number 1, which is the proper use of the area, so you have to create proper use in the area, that will then help the body realise, okay, we haven't got a problem here anymore. Now, there will be a degree of muscle guarding, which is your body just guarding. Just the problem could be completely gone, but there will still be a perception in the brain, unconsciously, that there's a problem there, and the muscles will guard against it. So that could be there as well. Or it could be there and there is no problem there. That could also be a scenario. But what we have to do is we have to release that tension. So we have to start using the spine more effectively. And what we're going to do in part number 3 is start talking about what that solution is. And hopefully it will help people understand that muscle weakness isn't the cause and muscle strength isn't the solution.